Hello, my name is Ari Kotler, and you are listening to Different on Sleepy Hollow Radio. Different will introduce you to incredible people who have overcome profound challenges and adversity in order to become successful in their lives. My first guest is Dr. Kerry Magro. Dr. Magro is an advocate from New Jersey who speaks around the country to educate people about his condition, autism. He received a doctorate in educational technology leadership from New Jersey City University. 3 years ago, I introduced Dr. Magro before he presented to the middle school. Dr. Magro was such an engaging speaker that I had to invite him to this show. He generously agreed to share time with our listeners. Welcome, Dr. Magro.
Ari, thank you so much for having me. I miss you, and I'm so glad to be on your show.
That's real nice to hear. It's a pleasure to have you also. And so I wanted you to talk about the first couple of years of your life first and how it led to your diagnosis with autism spectrum disorder.
Sure. So I was not speaking until I was 2.5. And growing up, I dealt with a lot of challenges from not being able to communicate with my loved ones about even some of my basic needs. That led to my parents fighting for a diagnosis, which took about 18 months. And when I was about 4, I was diagnosed with autism, a specific type of autism called pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, in 1992. So quite some time ago.
Wow, you were real lucky to be diagnosed in 1992. I know that a lot of people didn't really diagnose as much as they do now. They didn't have the same technology. So what did your parents do after your diagnosis, and how did they help you? Did you receive therapies of some sort?
Yeah, so, I mean, my parents were very much deer in headlights after receiving that diagnosis, although they were very happy that they finally had a label that they could put to understand a little bit more about the challenges that I was going through. So my parents got me involved right away with physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. Speech therapy was really incremental because even though I started saying my first few words when I was 3, I didn't start speaking complete sentences till I was 7. So those therapies were huge. And as I got older and my parents learned about my key interests, I got involved with music and theater therapy. I grew up wanting to be the 6th member of the Backstreet Boys. I could tell you like every single track on their Millennium album. Because of autism, I've always had extreme key interest. So my parents got me involved with music therapy, which was really helpful. And then I fell in love with theater, and that became a therapy to help me as well.
It's real interesting about music and autism because when I was a baby, I woke up in the middle of the night, started crying, and it was real important that my mom played music because otherwise I wouldn't go back to sleep. And that's probably why I'm so into music these days, and actually I do play the upright bass. But anyway, did you attend preschool?
Yes, I had a really tough time in preschool. I actually got kicked out of 2 therapeutic preschools because they said they didn't know how to control my quote unquote autistic behaviors. So yes, I did attend preschool and then led to kindergarten and where I am today.
And just to make it clear, they called your behaviors autistic before your diagnosis or after your diagnosis?
So these were my autistic behaviors, so before my original diagnosis.
Well, also want to make clear, did that help your parents get to your diagnosis?
Not really. I mean, the biggest thing was the speech issue. Not being able to communicate at all using my words was very, very challenging. And that's why my parents realized, along with sensory challenges, I was always really, really overwhelmed by loud noises. That led to my parents wanting to go about the diagnosis.
So how did that change as you got into K-12 schooling? I know you were not really speaking into complete sentences till you were 7, so that you probably were in a grade school by then. But how did your experiences change when you got into K-12?
I think one of the biggest things was I was getting an IEP for the first time. And for people listening in at home, it's an individualized education plan. And I started receiving accommodations. I started having a child study team for the first time. And it was something very life-changing for me. to be in a K through 12 program where I was receiving some supports. And even though I didn't know about my diagnosis until I was like 11 and a half, it was a game changer. Being able to also be around more peers. I was an only child. So being around kids that were the same age as me, especially early on.
So you mentioned that you had friends. So that's really something I didn't really have when I first got into school. You also mentioned that you had a lot of therapies and you had an IEP. IEPs are amazing. They really help the people that need them, and I encourage all parents that if you need to get an IEP, please demand it. It's a legal document. You might need it, and especially in high school when tests get really hard, especially when you're high functioning, IEP is very important. How was college and university? When you got into college and university, and did things change for you then? Because I want to just see, we're doing good in K-12, but how did that change in college and university?
Yeah, I mean the biggest change was in K through 12. I was around kids with a bunch of different learning disabilities, and in college there was far less individuals with learning disabilities, and I realized that there was a lot more self-advocating I needed to do to get my accommodations. So everything wasn't necessarily on a silver platter anymore when it came to services. It was more on the lines of realizing that I'm a young adult now and having to really, truly advocate. And that actually kind of led to my career in autism advocacy, and I think played a big part in what I'm doing today in public speaking.
What else inspired you to be an advocate in autism speaking?
I mean, the biggest thing is I didn't have any role models when I was growing up as a kid. Ari, one of the things I loved from when you introduced me all those years ago was the fact that you kind of had looked up to me, and I just found that so just it's so touching, and so I was so honored that you would even mention that. And like when I was your age, I didn't have anyone that I could look up to who was on the autism spectrum, and that kind of made my autism advocacy even more important, to tell people that I was on the spectrum and hopefully get the opportunity to work with some amazing individuals who are on the spectrum. And I've been doing that for basically the past 10 years now, while also being a full-time public speaker, getting the opportunity to mentor a lot of young kids with autism and disabilities.
So something interesting you mentioned before the interview, we talked for a little bit, and you mentioned that Sleepy Hollow Middle School and High School was the last school you talked to before the pandemic. How has things changed during the pandemic and currently? Got to be careful with how you phrase that.
Oh yeah, no. Zoom fatigue is definitely something that I'm have had challenges with. I've literally gone from just in-person events all the time to now doing things virtually, and I love to travel. I love getting to go to amazing places. I mean, before the lockdown even started, we were in California, Texas, in California, we were in Orange County, San Francisco, and it's just like all these amazing places we were going to get the opportunity to speak. We realized during the lockdown that that was not going to happen. And don't get me wrong, social distancing was important, but it was a very challenging routine change. And now, hopefully, knock on wood, we are going to be going back to some more in-person events this upcoming 2022. So fingers crossed.
So what is the hardest part of having a speaking event?
I think the hardest part about having a speaking event is the technical challenges. And what I mean by that is like, for example, sometimes I'll have my mic go off like halfway through because of a technical issue, or I'll have my PowerPoint slides just stop working all of a sudden. And that can get really, really frustrating, especially for someone like myself, where routine is really, really important. Those are some of the things, the unexpected things that happen, and being able to realize like, all right, keep going. You're going to get through this. And just realizing that this happens to everyone.
You
who's speaking.
also are a major motion picture consultant. Can you explain how that job works and what films you assisted?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I mentioned earlier in the interview, I mean, I just fell in love with theater as a kid. And I realized right away that I wasn't necessarily the greatest actor in the world, but I fell in love with the history of theater and the history of media. And that led me, when I started to become an autism advocate, to reach out to our entertainment world and let them know that I have a background in theater. I also am on the autism spectrum, and that I would be willing to help out. And I started when I was just 21, 22 years old, getting to work with Warner Brothers on a movie called Joyful Noise, starring Queen Latifah and Dolly Parton, based on one of the characters being on the autism spectrum. And that opportunity just led to more and more opportunities, getting to work with HBO on a project, indie films on autism, in addition to a project I'm currently working on for Netflix, which I can't talk a lot about right now, but I'm really excited about. So yeah, it's just been a dream come true to get an opportunity to continue my love of theater in behind the scene role today.
Aren't non-disclosure agreements fun? So you mentioned Joyful Noise, and that's something I've heard a lot about on your website and around all over the internet about you. So can you explain what that film was about exactly?
Sure. So that film was about a church choir who were going about a singing competition. And the reason why I was brought on to that film specifically is because Queen Latifah's character in the film had an autistic teenager as a son. And it was played incredibly by Dexter Darden, who's now on the Saved by the Bell Peacock series, and is just an incredible actor. But I was brought on to give advice to him based on my own journey growing up as a teen on the autism spectrum, to make sure it was as authentic and realistic as humanly possible to our autism community. So it really related to people who might be watching, who not only are on the autism spectrum, but also family members as well.
With the characters you worked on, which one can you most personally relate to? Which of the characters you worked on is the one that you feel closest to?
Ari, I have to tell you, these are some of the and I've done a few interviews in the past, but these are some really, really good questions. And nobody's ever asked me that question before. I think they, even though it was a girl character, a film I worked on called Jane Wants a Boyfriend, which was about a girl who's 25 years old trying to find love, who's on the autism spectrum. That probably related the most to me because I was able to write a book, ironically enough, when I was 26, about autism and relationships, called Autism and Falling in Love. And I relate most to the character in the film, Jane, because I was also searching for love then. I still am searching for love today, but I could relate to a lot of her because of that journey and trying to find love on the spectrum.
What is so hard about trying to find love for you?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is finding somebody who understands my quirks, understands who I am as a person. I definitely think that there is at times a lack of understanding of people who are on the autism spectrum. And sometimes that, like my friend Temple Grandin says, people think of people with autism as different and less versus different and not less, which is her quote. So I think a lot of the time it's really finding somebody who just is truly willing to understand who I am as a person, and understand some of the challenges that I have, but also understand that I'm just like anyone else and we're all human at the end of the day.
You also mentioned Temple Grandin. What was your favorite quote that Temple Grandin has? Because she's mentioned stuff like every time rules and stuff. Which of her quotes is your favorite?
I mean, the classic one, different, not less, sticks out to me more often than not. The quote where she talks about stretching our kids, because I feel like sometimes in schools, we can sometimes not challenge our autistic students enough, and we kind of put them in this bubble and not necessarily giving them the trying to push them to see what they're capable of and using their label as kind of a crutch and not really giving them opportunities to see what they're capable of. So I think those two in particular are ones that have stuck out to me over the years, although she's written countless books and has some really, really great quotes in the community.
Yeah, and she also has a lot of advice for people with autism also, so she's someone I do look up to. And I was wondering if you have advice to give to a high school student on the autism spectrum or a middle school student or someone maybe even in college.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always say is that you need to self-advocate for yourself. Again, autism is a spectrum, so I know that there are some individuals who are able to self-advocate for themselves more than others. But for those who are in college, for those who are in high school, who are just pursuing future careers, whether it's going to college, whether it's getting a job, understand yourself, build on some self-awareness for yourself, and realize that after school ends, you are going to be a little bit more in the driver's seat in terms of need to advocate for yourself and be independent.
So your book, Defining Autism from the Heart, actually, I'm on your website right now as we speak, so I can ask you some good questions. It reached an Amazon bestseller list icon. So can you explain why you think that book was so successful?
Wow, that's another great question. Ari, you're on fire. I think the biggest reason why it was able to have commercial success is I was just getting started involved with many autism organizations at that time. And I think it was because of my involvement with some really great organizations and being able to get the word out about the book really helped it just reach heights that I never imagined. I assumed it was going to sell 50 copies, and seeing it on number one on the Amazon bestseller list for special need parenting, it blew away all my expectations for it, and I just couldn't be more proud. But it also inspired me to continue to write today, and I'm just so glad that I had the opportunity to write that one. That book in particular, my debut book, Defining Autism from the Heart, will always have a very special place in my heart.
I encourage you listeners to check out his books. He has a lot of real interesting books, and I can tell you that personally, introducing him at a speaking event, I can tell you this dude knows what he's talking about. So where can someone contact you?
Sure. So people can contact me on my website. It's Kerry Magro, KerryMagro.com. There's a contact form there where if you're trying to learn more, if you want to book me for a speaking engagement, if you want me to help you with some consulting for your next film, or even some consulting to help a potential parent, potential child or student who's on the autism spectrum or has a disability, that there will be more information on the website. I'm also all over social media, so feel free to follow me on Facebook at Kerry's Autism Journey, and then just search my name in Google for Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and probably a few other social media channels. I'm losing track of all
LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Yeah, that's a lot. But I think you hit all of them.
Well, yeah.
So that was a great interview to have our first guest to actually be someone exemplifies the characteristics of being different and equal or greater. And that's what's so amazing about this show, is that we're going to have more people in the future that are different. And it was so nice to have you as our first guest. And thank you so much, because this was amazing. This was a real good experience for the listener. And I think this is going to be a game changer for the station. So thank you very much.
Ari, I appreciate it. And just being your first guest, I was so touched and so honored. And it was just so great to get your email and just seeing a familiar name pop in there. And give the best to your mom as well, because I think your mom gave me a
Yeah,
friend
yeah, yeah,
request
yeah,
so
yeah.
many years ago, and she's definitely kept me posted on what you've been up to and all the great stuff you're
Oh,
doing.
that's
And
so cool.
yeah, if there's like an online link when this interview goes up, definitely feel free to email it to me. I'd be more than happy to tweet it out or just post it somewhere on my social
Okay,
media.
thank you so much.
All right, all right, all right. Have a good one, and good luck with everything, man. You're
Hey,
you're a rock
bye.
star.